And I do think that based on type, not just those introverted judging functions, not just introverted thinking accuracy or introverted feeling authenticity, but as all of our functions, I do think this touches on elements of all, particularly the judging functions, the feeling and thinking functions. And I do think trust is going to be more related to the judging functions than it is the perceiving functions. Because just like we mentioned in a previous podcast, it's going to be about evaluation. Do I trust this person? Right? Can I trust them? And it's just that we're talking about ourselves when we ask the question. So I do think our judging functions or decision-making functions help us make that determination. So I think the conversation should probably stay a little bit more in the realm of those functions than, say, intuition and sensing.
Yeah, and something you said earlier where you said it hinges on the introverted judging functions. And as I'm reflecting, and you said maybe like an EJ might simplify their criteria, but that simplification is to cover maybe some uncertainty there. And I think that people that have introverted judging functions in the lower parts of their cognitive function stack or in the backseat of their car, in the car model, I think they're the ones that tend to report a lack of self-trust the most. It's not that we don't all deal with it. I've just anecdotally noted, I haven't done the numbers, maybe I'm totally wrong, but like, there's not a lot of IPs, for example, that write into us and say, I'm really struggling with self-trust. Like they might have other aspects of the self they struggle with, but usually they really trust themselves. And I wonder if you're onto something. That hinging on the introverted judging function is part of it because, again, like IFJ is that introverted thinking or accuracy, 10-year-old tertiary process. It's that critical voice in the head, right? For an INFJ, I can see that eroding self-trust like crazy. And I see INFJs talking about self-trust all the time. So it must be an issue that is coming up. And maybe, again, it's hinging on that function.
And what people are trusting themselves around.
Of course.
I also wonder if, I think this is also related a bit to maturity. I see younger IP types having less self-trust, but it's usually not, again, so that certainty model or the idea or concept of certainty is really helpful in these conversations.
Yeah.
So if you haven't heard that podcast, I highly recommend you do because we're probably going to be referencing it a bit. The higher up a function goes, the more certainty we have around it, and certainty in its ability to help guide us through life. If a function is our first function, that dominant or driver function, we think it's the right tool for all the jobs. And so introverted thinking accuracy for ITPs and introverted feeling or authenticity for IFPs, they're going to have high certainty that they're doing it right. I'm thinking the right thoughts. I have the right intentions and motivations, or, I'm very, I know myself and I understand myself for introverted feeling or authenticity. That's the direction they would go. I know myself. I know what's right for me. Introverted thinking or accuracy would be like, I'm being logical. I'm assessing the situation through, a clean lens. I'm not that biased. I know how things work. And so there's a sense of high certainty with that, regardless of age, because we just come with a sense of certainty around that. But there might be a lot of uncertainty around how one is going about doing things. And so when I've noticed when IPs lack self-trust, it's trust in their judgment to do things in the outside world. So an ITP type might not really trust their ability to navigate a social situation. They might have very low self-trust around that. And that, I think that's where the extroverted judging functions come in with, I said they hinged on the introverted judging functions because we're self-assessing. But we're self-assessing sometimes what we've done in the outside world, right? Like I watched myself do that and I didn't do it very well.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of heat for it. So maybe I shouldn't trust myself when it comes to that. It's still, for an ITP, it's still introverted thinking or accuracy going, I'm not competent there. It's still a self-assessment, but it's also assessing one's performance and going, I shouldn't trust myself in social situations maybe. The anecdote I had, that experience I had was with, I think, an IFP type. And it was a younger girl who was a cashier at a store I was at yesterday making purchases. And it was really interesting how you could tell she had a lot of self-doubt around how she was going about her job. And she narrated it for me. It was really interesting. There were some porcelain items I had purchased, just dishes, like serving dishes.
Yeah.
And she let me know. She goes, okay, because it was clothing and then it was some dishes and it was like a decorative item here or there. And, it was like one of those stores that sell a lot of everything or a lot of variety of things. And so she put the clothes to the side and she's like, I'm putting the clothes to the side now. I'm like, okay. And then she goes, and I'm going to put the dishes over here and I'll decide whether or not I'm going to wrap them in a minute. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so she finished up with all the other softer, clothing items and that sort of thing. And then when she got to the dishes, the servingware, or the porcelain, serving dishes, she goes, should I wrap these? I'm like, well, you're the professional. I'm like, I'm sure this is not your first rodeo, so you can do as you see fit. And she's like, I feel like I should wrap them, but I don't know. I mean, it was kind of charming in a way that she was so forthcoming with her uncertainty around it. And I just said, well, what does your judgment tell you? And she said, wrap them. That's what I should do. I should wrap them. And I'm like, well, I agree. I was like, if you wrap them, they're not going to get chipped as easy. And I don't want to go home with chipped dishes. So I would go with your judgment. She's like, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
Is this the first time she's ever sold a dish in this place, or?
Well, I feel like if it had been her first day, she would have told me because she was very forthcoming.
But like nobody's bought porcelain dishes or anything? Like she's never had to wrap them before in her role? Like ever? Or
she has, but it's maybe been more obvious in the past, or maybe she just always gets the input of the person who's her customer.
See, I'm interpreting immediately she's trying to get out of doing it, and she's hoping you'll let her off the hook by saying, "Oh, you don't need to worry about it. I'll just take them as they are." Like it's not an uncertainty frame. I think again, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But I'm reading it as, she doesn't want to do extra work unless you request it as the customer.
No,
like, I don't want to go the extra. I don't want to do this extra work. Do you want me to wrap it? And that's why she was checking in with you. That's how I interpreted it.
Yeah. No. Well, maybe, but that's not the sense I got. I didn't get a sense that she was trying to get out of work. I got a sense that she really lacked trust of her own judgment. That she didn't want to do something that would upset me. Maybe she'd had a couple run-ins with really salty customers or something. But it was a hesitation of, is this the right way to go about this? Is this going to...
So it wasn't trying to get you to do it for her or check in to see if you could let her off the hook. You definitely feel like the motivation was...
There was a little bit of an assumption that I was going to help her with her job. There definitely was. But it didn't feel like trying to get out of work. It felt like an uncertainty, a lack of trust in her ability to do it on her own. That's what it felt like. She felt very sincere.
Certainly. Okay.
Yeah. And again, she was probably late teens. I doubt early 20s. I think she was probably hovering around 18 or 19. So young, right? And kind of depends on, not every 18-year-old is the same, right? 18 isn't 18 isn't 18. Some 18-year-olds are like very much still under their parents, in their world and looking to their parents to make all their decisions for them. And a little, younger for their age. And some 18-year-olds are like living on their own and bought their car and, they're off doing they're doing their life. So at this point, you can't really judge maturity by age anymore, I don't think. That said, it just really felt like she was almost immobilized by this lack of trust in her judgment. So as she was wrapping it up, she's like, yeah, my mom tells me I just really need to trust myself more. And she's like wrapping up all these things, telling me about her mom and that her mom says that she just really needs to trust her own judgment and make more decisions and be more decisive. It was super charming. And I said, well, your mom's right. You do need to trust your judgment more because you have two different options. The one is your judgment was right. It was accurate and you did the right thing. Or you totally messed it up and now you have an opportunity to learn from that experience. And she's like, yeah, you're right. That is. And so it was an interesting interaction. It took a long time because it took a while for her to wrap all of these things up because, again, she is not an assertive person at this age. I'm sure she will be at some point in the future. But what I realized is that her lack of self-trust, her lack of trust in her own judgment, is in part her inability to move forward if she believes that she's going to do it wrong.
Yeah. Risking failure.
Yes.
Is important for her.
Yeah.
Because if she doesn't risk it not going well, she's never going to try. And then she's not going to get the reference experience to build self-trust.
That's right. And so a part of self-trust, it's not implicit in the definition, but a part of self-trust, and I think this is why it bleeds over not just into the introverted judging functions to some extent, but just into people in general. I think you have to have the ability to be kind to yourself, no matter what the result of your action was. I think you need to be able to forgive yourself if you mess up. Trusting oneself and trusting one's own judgment means that no matter what happens on the other side, regardless of whether or not you succeed or failed or it was just fine or you totally messed up or whatever it was, that at that moment, you know that you're not going to like self-flagellate and you're not going to drop into a puddle of, of Jello because you didn't do this thing right.